Hey, this is Kevin, and welcome to Chapter 7 of the Intro to Joomla series. In this video, we're going to be talking about user management. So in a bit more detail, that's going to cover user registration, authentication, profiles, groups, access levels, and permissions. We're going to demo how to set these permissions, to create users with these permissions, how to change these permissions, how to restrict access to articles and menu items based on those permissions. We're going to talk about the relationship between author, editor, and publishers. And we'll also talk a bit about front end editing and back end access. So, a few key definitions here. The first one is a user group. This dictates what a user can do, which is not to be confused with the access levels, which dictate what a user can see or access. Access levels are kind of normally more generalized than user groups. Permissions are where we set what user groups can do with actions, and user authentication is the service or protocols used to authenticate a user. Are 9 default user groups and 5 different access levels, and I've kind of divided them up into categories in this graph here. So everyone's part of the public access level. That's the most broad and general access level. And there is a corresponding user group called public. So if we set a menu item to public, that means that everyone can see it. Now, a more specific type of access level is guest. Guests are specifically unregistered users. So people who are not logged into the site at all are considered guests. That means if something is set to have a guest access level, only guests can see that item. That means if someone logs into the site and the access level is set to guest on something, then that person that's now logged in would no longer be able to see that item. So you could display different messages to guests versus registered users and so on. The access level of registered is the most common user group. That's what most of your users will probably be. If you have subscribers or memberships, anything like that, just general users of your website, the registered user group is kind of like the general, like they have an account group, if that makes sense. Now, beyond registered, there are more specific user groups or higher level user groups, such as managers, authors, editors, publishers, and everything we see here. It's kind of like all these different user groups. Um, there's kind of like this is a relationship or this hierarchy. So a manager is also going to be part of the registered access level and the registered user group because they have an account and because they have to have an account to be a manager. And then a administrator is also going to have all the same permissions of a manager plus some extra things. So um, a manager could be an administrator, but not all managers are administrators. All administrators are managers, and all administrators and managers are registered, if that makes sense. But it doesn't go the other way. People can be registered without being managers or administrators. Super users are the highest level group. So that's what your root user should be. Ideally, you would only have one super user and everyone else would be administrators or below. And for security reasons, it's generally best to have just one super user and to only use that account in situations where you really need to. Like you should have a super user account and a standard administrator account. And then for most of your actions, you would actually just do it under your administrator account, and then you only log into that super user account when you absolutely have to. The special access level is also tied in with those managers. It's basically anything above registered. So there's a user group of manager, administrator, like we just kind of covered. So they're also registered, but they're also special. And then there's more specific groups that have some permissions, but they're not exactly like site managers. such as author, editor, and publisher, and those roles are really related to publishing content. So an author can write content, an editor can edit content, and a publisher can write, edit, and publish content. Then, of course, again, super users can do everything. Okay, I have a new fresh copy of Joomla installed. It's been a while since I've made one of these Joomla videos, so if it doesn't exactly line up with where I was in the last video, that is why, but that should not affect us as far as discussing the user management and permissions and all that good stuff goes. So I just have a fresh copy of Joomla with the blog sample data installed, and I'm logged into the backend. The first thing I want to discuss is some of the user management tools in general. So if we are in the admin panel, we go to users, we have this nice menu option with a bunch of different things to pick from. The first one at the top there, manage. This will list all the users that Joomla has on your website and provide you with key details about them. For example, I can go to my user, I can reset my password here, I can set my email, the assigned user groups, the basic settings, all that good stuff can be found with the user management screen. Next thing is groups and access levels. So if we take a look here, we have all these different groups that I did briefly touch on a moment ago. And if we go into access levels, we can see that, like I said before, user groups kind of dictate what you can do, and access dictates more of what you can, well, access or see. So user groups with viewing access are grouped into these access levels. So access levels is a bit more general than user groups. They are two distinct things. Fields, we're not going to worry about fields or field groups for now. You can customize user fields, like if you want to add a different, like additional properties to certain users, that's an option, but that's beyond the scope of this video. And I have a tutorial on my website if you want to check that out. User notes, just a way of keeping tabs on your users. If you want to write down, I don't know, what people are doing, interactions, what people's purposes on your website, you can take notes here. I don't really use that feature. Privacy. The privacy, this has to do with, I think, like GDPR, whatever the privacy policies are over in the European Union. Since I'm in the US, I don't technically have to honor these, I don't think, but basically these allow us to, well, this allows us to let our users, gives them the option to do things like request all their user data or request that all their user data is removed from your website. So you can implement these features if you want to. It's pretty straightforward. But basically, a user submits a request. They log into their account. They say, "Hey, I want to remove all my account data from your website." You get a notice. You say, "Okay, I'll remove it," and then you remove all their data. And that is what that is for. User actions log, it just logs every single thing users do. As far as like logging in, making updates to components or modules or articles and that type of thing. Mass mail. Mass mail is a relatively easy way that you can send messages to all your user base at once. Now, I'm not sure if this is like if it uses like a queue or anything, but if you're using mass mail, depending on how your email's set up, this might not actually work if you have more than like a few users, because if you're using just a regular like shared web host, like a cheap one, you probably won't be able to mail more than like 5 people at a time or something like that, unless you're using um, like a third party mail server or mailing service that is designed for this type of thing. But you could use this to say like update to terms of service, and you could say, we just updated our terms of service. Please agree to them, or just, those types of emails. Just transactional, informational emails. If you wanted to do like a mailing list or something else, there are other extensions you can use for that. This would not be used for mailing lists. At least I wouldn't recommend it for that. And finally, we have messaging and private messages. Joomla has an internal private message system that you can use to, well, it says what it does right there. It says messages, it sends messages to other site administrators, and you can read their replies and such. So it only works in the back end with site admins. It's not for like messaging your users or anything like that. All right. That's a general overview of the user management. Now let's look at some of the more nitty-gritty details. Let's take a look at the user registration system. So I want to enable that so users can create accounts on the website just without any administrator intervention. And to do that, we need to add or enable the user registration feature. If we go to the user manager options or the global config under the component options for users, there is the very first option there, allow user registration and what group we're going to put the users in as soon as they're registered. And I'll talk a bit more about some of these other settings in a second, but if we save that and refresh the home page, now you can see my login module has a create an account button, as does the login page. If you don't have the login module or the login link, you can add the login link with the menu manager and you can create a new module for the login module, the default that's included with Joomla. So if the user doesn't have an account, they go through pretty standard user registration process, their name, username, password, and email address. Now, how the user ultimately ends up getting authenticated, that depends on what authentication plugins we're using and what the default settings are. If we go to the plugin manager under Joomla system plugins, you can see we have these authentication options. The default is authentication Joomla, and you always have to have at least one authentication plugin enabled or you can't get into your website. So there are different authentication plugins available on the extensions directory. For example, if you want to let people authenticate with, say, like on kevinsguides.com, I have the pretty standard login option with Google or Facebook, and that's done using, I believe, it's a software by Akiba. Akiba Social, is it called Social Logins? Yes, it is. So if you want to check that out, Akiba Social Login, you can add authentication via Facebook and Google and things like that. There are other extensions that do that as well. And then there's additional options like two-factor authentication and all those other fun security things. But for now, let's just try to focus on the basic user registration. So I'm going to create a test user here. The name's just going to be registered. And of course, I wouldn't do this on a production site. And the password is just going to be registered. Actually, that doesn't meet my requirements. So let's do registered 123. And the email will be registered at test.com, and I'll just register. Okay, let's see what happens when I do that. So I get an error, could not instantiate mail function, and an error occurred while sending the email registration. That's because I'm on a local test server and I don't have the emails set up for PHP mail in my global config or anything like that. But it is trying to send a email to say, hey, you're a new user. You can see the account was created. It's just not enabled or activated. And that has to do with the new user account activation settings and send mail. So you can see here, that's where the send mail came from. It's trying to send an email to an administrator saying someone, created a new account. And we can actually change this option so the user authenticates themselves or activates the account themselves. Right now it's set so only administrators, by default can activate accounts. So if you just turn on that initial setting here under the user options, allow user registration, what that does is it makes it so people can create their accounts, but they can't actually log in or get into them until the administrator manually comes in here and unblocks them and hits enabled and activated. So now the account is active and we can get in. But if we want the user to be able to do that themselves, we have two options under the, again, backend global config for the users component. Under the activation policy, new user account activation. So administrator, that means, like I just said, we have to do it as admins. If we set it to self, it will send the user an email and then they will click a confirmation email and that activates their account. So that's what you're probably used to on most websites that you have to register for. You put your email in, they send you an email and you hit a link. So that's what that option does. Of course, email has to be working on your server. If for some reason email is not working on your server, you can set new user account activation to none. I would not really recommend that, but what that does is it makes it so people can create a new account just with a username and password, and they could use a fake email if they wanted to. It doesn't require any activation. It just automatically throws everyone into the registered user group as a new user. So let's sign in now that I have activated my account just to kind of take a look at some stuff here. So I'm registered, uh, registered, registered 123. I log in. And now we can see the login button has been replaced with log out. That has to do with access and view. And the login form here, now it says hi registered, and it gives us the option to log out. What I would like to do next is to examine this access level and user group a bit more. So again, if we go to the user manager and look at the access levels and the user groups, we have this registered access level, and that contains registered super user manager. So basically anyone with an account is considered to be in this level of registered. So as you can see too, we have like special, unregistered, and super users. So super users is in all three of these. So super users is basically like you can be in multiple access levels. And if we go to the menu here, let's see how that access level ties in. So when I was logged out, the menu item said log in. And when I'm logged in, it says logged out. And that has to do with the access level right here. So you can see we actually have two different menu items here, log in and log out right next to each other. When the user is a guest, so when they're not logged in, it shows them the login button. And then when the user is logged in under any account type, so registered, they are shown the log out button instead. That makes sense. If we click on the menu item, and this applies to any menu item, but let's just take a look here. We set that access level over here on the right as registered, guest, special, whatever. So that's where we actually change the access level. If I set log out and say, let's make that super users. Since registered, my current logged in user is not in that user group. Now when I refresh the page, that logout button disappears because I'm no longer a given access to that menu item. And now that I'm still registered, we can see when I try to visit that logout page, under the registered user account, it says you don't have permission to access that page because I'm in the registered user group. I'm no longer allowed to go to that logout page. I've been permanently locked out of that unless I log into a super user account. So I'm just going to set that back to registered and save. And now when I go to my website /logout, we can see it just says you have been logged out. So the logout button is probably not something you'd want to change the access level on. You'd probably just want to leave that as registered. That wasn't the best example in the world, but at least we can see how that works. The same thing applies to like site modules. We can restrict which user groups as well, or which access levels can see which modules. So the login form, if I only wanted that to be visible to guests or people who are logged in or whatever, that's where I would change that onto the same spot on the right with the access option for any module. So you could have special modules for administrators, and just show like statistics and things like that. I actually believe there is a built-in module that does that. Latest users and statistics. Yep, so you could make those published just so your administrators could view them if you wanted to. So you'd use the special user group in that case. All right, now let's take a look at another example. So there are extensions like there might be like situations where you want articles to be visible to certain users, and you can change the access level at the article level as well. So like everything, you can kind of configure this how you want. We can change the access level by category, by article, whatever is more like specific gets applied first, and then more general is applied next. So for this to have like a public access level on this article, if that's set um, to be special, this typography article, if I set that to special or super user, and now I won't be able to visit the typography page on my registered account. It's going to say I don't have access to that. But more broadly, this is in the typography category. So actually, let's just go ahead and set that back to public. So now I should be able to see that again. Okay. All right, and then we visit the category that that article is in, the typography category. We set the category to special instead of the article. Since typography is in that category, now it's going to say, okay, well, I can't act, even though the typography article itself is public, because it's in the typography category, which I just set to special. Now I cannot view it. Now, a super simple but useful example of why you might want to be changing that, other than the demonstration I just did. Say you have a subscriber category and like you have paid articles or like, I don't know, like lessons or content that you only want certain people to access. So I'm just going to create a new category called paid articles. And I'm actually going to also go to my access levels, and we have all these different access levels. I'm gonna actually first, before we do that, let's actually make a new user group. The group title is just going to be maybe subscribers, and the parent is going to be registered. So subscribers are registered users, but they're not like authors, editors, or publishers. And then we can go to access levels, and we can create a new access level, and I'm going to call this subscribers. So the same exact thing as the user group, and the user group with viewing access. I want managers, administrators. I don't want registered people, but I do want authors, editors, publishers, subscribers, and super users. So basically everyone that's not like regular registered or a guest or public. I save that, go back to my category. I take my paid articles category, and now I would set that to subscribers. And now only people who are in that subscribers user group would be able to see the paid article. So example article, blah, 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 blah. And we put that in the paid articles category. I save that. And I will just create a quick link to that on my home page. All right. So if I go there, it's going to give me an error because I got logged out because of a session time. That's another thing I should discuss here. But if I log back in as my administrator account, When I go to subscriber articles, we can see, okay, there's my paid subscriber article that I just created. If I log out and log back in as registered, we can see that now I'm registered. It's saying that I do not have permission to access this. Now, if I wanted to manually move users into that registered or that subscriber user group, so say I want this registered person, they paid me $50 and now I want to give them access, all I have to do is change the assigned user group. I want to leave them in registered, but I'm also going to add them to subscribers. I'm going to save it. And now my registered user, since they're in registered and subscribers, now they can view that article. All right, the next thing I'd like to do is to just demonstrate the entire user self-activation registration process. And to do that, I need a site with a working email system. And so I'm just going to use kevinsguides.com for this to demonstrate how this works. And let's generate a password. And now this section down here, terms and conditions, this is optional. That's set in the registration plugin settings, I believe. But we're just going to ignore that for now. And now I see I got a message saying that your account's been created and activation's been sent to that email. Here it is. Okay, so Kevin's Guides. Hello, Wilson Kevin. Thank you for registering. And then we click the activation link, see if that worked. And it did. So by clicking that link, it activated the account, and now my user status under here, if I do Olson Kevin here, it says I am automatically registered and activated. So where do I go to change the contents of this email when people are registered or during other parts of the registration of the registration process? That's handled under system, and then there is a mail templates option. And this is a newer Joomla feature, but this allows us to create and edit mail templates, which are messages that get sent to users from components. For example, I have Canina form on kevinsguides.com, so that's using some type of mail template here. The one I'm looking for is related to users. You can see we can like customize the users, the password reset, the admin notification, verify notification. It says what all these different mail templates do, but the one I'm looking for is not with admin. With Let's go to the next page here. So new account with self activation. So this is the self activation option. And we can see activate your account at Kevin's Guides. That is the same as the email that I received. And you can see here we have these template with available tags. So it says hello, name, and all you have to do is just click these these tags and it inserts them for you. So it's going to replace name with the name of the person. Thanks for registering, and then activation link, activate, thank you, support, privacy policy, whatever. So you can customize that to your heart's content, depending on how you set up your user activation system. There are going to be different templates, and not all of these templates are going to apply depending on which scenario you used. For example, since I used with self-activation, the new user account without self-activation or without activation, that's not going to apply. Um, Anyways, that's how you customize the emails and the general registration process for new users. There are a few other things I still want to cover in this video. The next thing of kind of major importance is permissions, and permissions control like specific actions that different user groups are allowed to perform. For example, and this is under the permissions tab of any component in the global config. But we can see here we have all these different actions that users can do, and it's going to say if they're allowed to do them or not allowed to do them. So this is where Joomla gives you kind of very granular control over which users are allowed to do what. For example, if we take a look at registered, okay, registered, they're allowed to log in. Yep, that makes sense. Guests, well, they're not logged in, so they can't. That makes sense. They're not allowed to log into the administrator end. They can't log into the back end. That's what when it says site login versus admin login, they're talking about the front end versus the back end. And we can see registered or authors, editors, and publishers. None of them are allowed to get into the backend system. But of course, super users, they're allowed to do everything. So they're all green. Subscribers, since I took those settings, or since subscribers are registered users, they inherit the settings of registered. And as we go up here, when it says like inherited, with the different permissions, we can see like for registered, they're allowed to log in, right? But they can't do anything with content. They're not allowed to create articles. We go to the author level. Okay, well now the authors, they're allowed to write stuff, so they have create permissions, but they can't delete or edit things. They can edit their own things, but they can't edit other people's stuff. Go up to editors. Editors, they can do everything that the author can do. It's inherited. But now they're also allowed to go ahead and edit articles that are not theirs, so they can edit other people's articles. And finally, publishers are allowed to edit anybody's articles that's inherited, but they can edit state. And when it says state, it means like published, unpublished, trashed. So they're allowed to actually go ahead and take unpublished articles and turn them on to published. Now, beyond just the global config, if we take a look at really any other component, it's most likely going to have some type of permissions that we're able to set. And the exact permissions are going to vary by component. The banners or the like built-in advertisement components, that's going to have different settings than the global component did. If we go to say smart search, permissions for smart search, you can see it still has create, edit, delete. Those are all standard like settings that apply across most components. So those are standard terms that you'll use, but they are per component. If we take a look at the modules component here, we can see it has pretty much all the same other things that all the other ones do, but modules, Joomla's module system has a front end editing feature. And we can see the permission there. Well, now, because that's specific to modules, under the permissions tab, we have an option to set which user groups are allowed access to the front end editing feature. And really, that's something we'd only want like super users and maybe administrators to have. The last thing I want to touch on is some more front end editing and user role type things that Joomla includes out of the box. And this would be useful if you have multiple people working on your website. That's where Joomla's user permission systems shine. So let's take a look at some of these other more advanced roles and some of the other more advanced options. The first thing I want to do is, as I just touched on with permissions, we can set like authors, they have create permissions, but they can't do anything else. So how do we make it so authors can actually go ahead and like publish content? Or at least write content, submit content for review. Well, if we go to the menu manager, what we can do here is create a submit article option. And the articles component has a create article option. And of course, I want to set the access to this to be special. So this would mean like special includes the user groups of author and up. So author, manager, publisher, admin, super admin, all that good stuff. So I save that and I'm going to create a new user. Actually, instead of creating a new user, I'm just going to throw my existing user registered. I'm going to make them an author now. So now they're registered author and subscriber. And let's make sure I'm still logged in. I am. And now since I'm an author, I can submit articles, right? Uh, Test author submission. I can write a little bit about the different things, but there's basically the same tabs we have for the most part accessible in the back end. All the important ones, at least, we have accessible in the front end. It's a bit simplified. There's not quite as many options. We can still do things like set a category and create new articles. We don't have the option to feature anything, but this is a test. But we can submit articles since I'm an author. All right, now if I'm in the back end as my admin, let's say I go ahead and I publish that article. Now when I refresh, well, now we can see, okay, test author submission. So there's the article I just wrote. I'm still under my author account. I'm the author of that. So I'm allowed to go ahead and now edit that live article, but I can't create a new one. Or I can't publish a new one. I can only edit that existing one, and I can't edit the other article since the other article was written by Kevin. So I can only edit my own article. And again, that ties into that edit own permission that I discussed a few minutes ago. All right. Now let's just go up to the next level here. So let's take my registered user and let's make them an editor now. So now we're an editor. I refresh. Now you can see I can edit both articles, but I still cannot publish or unpublish them. So if I go to the publishing tab, we can see I can see that it's published, but I can't actually click on it. It doesn't do anything. I can't even move the article's category or anything like that while I'm an editor. I can only change the actual content of the article. Again, next level publisher. Now that I'm a publisher, now I can go ahead, if I edit an article, you can see I can change the publishing options. I can basically change every single option now that is available to me on the front end. But I still can't log into the back end. All right. Those are the default roles as far as the front end side of the site goes. The other roles here I want to discuss are related to the back end. So super admins or super users, they can do everything. We already know that. That's the default account. That's the first account we create. The other levels underneath them are regular administrators, which can do most of the same things super users can do, but they can't get into the global configuration and, well, do anything else that's not set under the permissions for them. Manager is kind of an interesting one. So let's take a look at manager. So I'm going to make registered. I'm going to take them and I'm going to make them a manager now. I'm going to log out of my backend. Now managers, they're allowed to log into the administration panel, but they can't see nearly as much as an admin or super admin can. So if we look at the manager user group here, we can see, I can see all the people that are logged in. I can see articles. I can see media, but that's really it. We have access to components, whatever specific components that we've given our managers permission to access. But that's really about it. So this is kind of like a role. If you want, you could give this role to your publishers, and it would be for the most part the same, unless you change things as what they can do on the front end, but now they can do it from the back end layout. So say you don't want to deal with having the submit article and the users or your publishers having to edit things on the front end. You want them all to be able to kind of easily do that from the back end. Maybe it's a little faster, easier to navigate for them this way. We can make them managers and give them those permissions to get into the back end, but they still can't change like user options or see important sensitive data, things like that. They can only see articles, article categories, and whatever images we have uploaded on the website, unless you change their permissions, in which case they can really do whatever you want them to. So that is the back end with the manager user group. I'm not going to show you admin because admin's pretty much the same as super admin minus the global config and a few more specific examples. Now, there are some things I didn't touch on in this video, user fields. I'm not going to get into that now, but you can create, as I mentioned before, specific user fields. Like if you want them to be able to put some weird piece of information you want to store, like the employees ranking or something like that, you could put that in there. I do want to show you where this other option is. If we go into the plugins for user registration, maybe it's under users. I forgot the exact name. User profile. I think that's the one I'm looking for. Yes. If you enable this user profile plugin in the backend, this gives us access to some pre-built fields. So if you want to collect your users' addresses, like their city, their country, their zip code, make that all required, um, you can go ahead and enable that with this user profiles plugin. And now when I go to try to create an account for this website, what happens is that user profile stuff that shows up now, and now we can collect that information from the user if we want to. Now, speaking of user profiles, that's something we want to make editable in some way. Like if someone forgets their username or password, or let's just say they want to reset, um, we want to have an option on the front end for them to be able to get into and access that information. Right. If we go to our menu again, we create a new menu item. What we want is an option for the user to edit their user profile, and that was under menu item type users, edit user profile, and then just user profile. Or you can say like my profile, my site settings, whatever you want to go with. And that's going to be published, but we only want people who are logged in to be able to see that. So I set the access to registered. I refresh, go over to my main menu. Now I have an option to view my profile. Now from the front end, I can change my my password. I can change my email address and my basic settings like my language and my editor. There's a bunch of other things down here related to authentication, setting up YubiKeys, that type of thing. And I'm not getting into that right now, but that has to do with whatever plugins are enabled under authentication in the Joomla backend. I think that concludes this video for now. Might make some more specific videos on how to do some of the more like advanced things in the future. Or you can always check out my website at kevinsguides.com for more examples of things you can do with user accounts and permissions. Anyways, thanks for watching. Have a good one. Like and subscribe. Take care.